what can be learned from the first fight? Well, first of all, Masvidal's been in there with him for 25 minutes now, knowing full well that he wasn't as conditioned as he would have been had he been preparing for the fight from the beginning of training camp, like a number one contender. Usman knows that he can control Masvidal, and the sooner he does it, the safer, and the longer he does it, the easier. He also will be aware that there are burst attacks from Masvidal, which can be very dangerous, but they lessen in danger as the fight goes on. So a couple of things to consider for Masvidal. So one, if he gets tied up and he's put against the fence, if you watch the Cesar Ferreira fight, he's got a really nice short elbow that he kind of rolls over in short space, catches him with the top of his elbow. If that doesn't hurt them, it at least creates a space so he might be able to get off the fence or follow up with further attacks. He hit Nate Diaz with the same thing. Elbow, ran him down and then kicked him in the head as he was level changing. Those break attacks for Masvidal are going to be really useful because he'll be able to exploit the small gaps where Usman doesn't have control, whether that's because Masvidal's scrambled back to his feet because he's managed to get off the fence, or maybe because the referee stood them up. You know, this is another benefit to Masvidal's control and release tactic, because if Masvidal's on the bottom and Usman's not working, there's no threat for Masvidal, but there's also no benefit in Masvidal starting to strike himself, because if Masvidal from the bottom position starts to open up, then the referee will let them work. Whereas if Masvidal's in the bottom position and he's just holding on and controlling, it puts all of the responsibility on Usman to maintain a position. You know, he's got to create space, he's got to strike, he's got to try and pass and improve his position. So there's a real benefit in Masvidal if he finds himself in the bottom position, just kind of clinging on. Usman will need to keep the fight moving at certain points, but when the fight starts to move too quickly, he'll need to reel it back in again. So it's like, you know, he's got to manage the temperature of the fight. It can't get so cold that the referee gets bored and stands them up, because you guarantee if it's on the feet, it won't be doing that. You know, maybe against the fence. The clinch work and the ground game is where there's the potential for this fight to really slow down. Whenever it's at distance, whenever there's space between the two of them, Masvidal will always be working. Even if it's just his mind working, his footwork, trying to see where the gaps and the traps are. As soon as they close down, though, Masvidal can, to an extent, kind of start to rest. And if he finds himself clinched and he's resting and he's just being difficult and defending the odd takedown and scrambling back to his feet, then the referee sets them and he's got a burst attack again. And he can maintain that burst attack while ever he's dangerous and he's got space. But then, you know, he might get taken down, and then he clings on and he holds and he waits and bides his time and he rests. And then the referee stands him up, or Usman creates space and Masvidal scrambles and pushes him away, and then he's back to a break attack. I hope this is making sense. So they're the moments where Masvidal gets his way into this fight. It's going to be difficult to create those opportunities, and the more effort he spends on creating those opportunities, the less he'll have to expend in striking volume, because, you know, Usman's not going to let him just walk off the fence. He's going to make him work for it. If Masvidal's taken down, Usman's going to make him work for it to get back to his feet. And okay, well, let me just quick move into the grappling range now, because so if Usman takes Masvidal down against the fence, Masvidal will immediately, especially in the early rounds before he's tired, start working back to his feet. So this allows Usman to make Masvidal work without him being threatening at all. Usman can force Masvidal into this cycle, this grind cycle that DC uses and Khabib uses, and he will just slowly drain Masvidal, and that's the best and safest thing to do for the first 2 rounds. Put him in that cycle up against the fence where Masvidal's doing reps of wall walks, cage walks. I mean, that's a conditioning drill in most MMA gyms. It's draining to do. And if you've got someone as good as Usman holding you down and controlling you and striking you in the same time and stamping on your feet and punching you in the body and you know, that kind of stuff, it's going to drain you even further. And then you get those burst attacks, and in Masvidal's head, he's like, I've got 15 seconds now to be impactful. So he's now throwing everything the kitchen sink at to Usman, who's just walking him down and placing a jab, switching his stance, placing a jab. Like, Usman's all about managing the pace of the fight and slowly painting Masvidal into a corner where he's exhausted and he's breaking and he can't continue because he's got nothing left to give. And then that's where Usman starts to take top control. He starts to land ground and pound. He starts to work for arm triangles. I think most people going into this expect it to be very similar to the first fight. And I think you would be right. I think it'd be very similar to the first fight, unless Masvidal can find a way of doing something different. You know, he fatigued very quickly in the first fight. You know, at the end of the first round, you could already see the fire was gone in his strikes, and he had a couple of bursts maybe in the second round, and I think a little burst in the fourth, but really not much. And even at the end of the first round, you can see Usman now. He drops his hands and he's like, now he feels the threat of Masvidal starting to wane, and he can start to impose his own game.